Behind me is perhaps one of the most unusual vehicles ever made, the Subaru BRAT. And in this video, we're going to take it off-road, see what an old Subaru will do in the dirt, we're going to get it up on the lift, see how it's engineered, and tell you all about the BiDrive Recreational All-Terrain Transporter. That's right, BRAT was actually an acronym, BiDrive Recreational All-Terrain Transporter. And the Subaru BRAT was a small two-door, four-seater pickup introduced by Subaru in 1978 per the request of the head of Subaru of North America, because in the 70s small trucks were all the rage. This vehicle was sold in many markets. It was very popular in New Zealand, but was never actually sold brand new in Japan, interestingly enough. Now, the BRAT was based on the Lyon station wagon, and it clearly shares a lot of the same components. This one, unfortunately, has this rather tragic topper on it, which kind of ruins the pickup aesthetic of the BRAT, and of course, this terrible two-tone, well, maybe three-tone if you include the atrocious red. But we gotta talk about the BRAT's most unique feature. Now, imported trucks to the US are subject to something called the chicken tax, which is a 25% tariff. It's the reason we don't get vehicles like the Volkswagen Amarok and the Toyota Hilux. Now, Subaru wanted to import this vehicle to the US but not pay that 25% tariff, so what do? Well, they stuck some seats in the bed, and they originally had the bed lined in carpet so that this vehicle was not considered a truck. There's actually a great car driver about this vehicle when it was brand new, and here's what they said. The EPA considers it a light-duty vehicle. The DOE calls the BRAT a special purpose vehicle. US Customs has ruled it it's not a truck because the cargo bed is too small and littered with plastic seating and carpeting, and the NHTSA has called it a multi-purpose passenger vehicle. So nobody really knew what to call this vehicle, but all you really need to know is that because it had seats and carpet in the back, it was not subject to that tariff. So it was a very smart way to get around the chicken tax. Now, the Subaru BRAT is powered by a Boxer 4, as were just about every other Subaru from this era, as they are today actually, but a little smaller than today's Subaru. So this is a 1.6 liter Boxer 4. It's called the EA71. It makes a whopping 67 horsepower, and it is a tiny engine. It spans probably less than a foot in length. A single person can pick it up by themselves, and it really is a great little engine. Water cooled, unlike Volkswagens back in the day, and the spare tire they actually mounted under the hood as well, saving space elsewhere, but it also meant that spare tires had a tendency to crack rather quickly. So lots of weird engineering, right? When you consider back in the late 70s when this car was new, most vehicles were V8s, V6s, a lot of inline four cylinders, and Subaru had that rather bizarre Boxer 4. I mean, other than Volkswagen, they were really the only ones seriously exploring some interesting engine technology. Okay, Mazda had the rotaries, which was cool, but yeah, Subaru was doing some weird stuff back in the day. Now, I really like these 1970s Subarus. They're actually my favorite era of cars because they were just really delicate but extremely well made. And obviously this car has had a pretty rough life. You can tell by the rip tears and the rather questionable paint job, but even still, the car is rather squeak free. Everything is very simple, easy to use, and everything functions like it did we're going on 50 years ago. So that's why I like these cars, right? They're not fast, they're certainly not flashy, but they brought some interesting technology to the table and a lot of premium build quality. So with the Subaru up on the lift, we can take a look at its rather unusual engineering. So this vehicle is powered by a flat four-cylinder mounted entirely in front of the front wheels. So you can see the oil pan right up front, unshielded here except for these kind of crash bars that are painted this horrible red color. And then you'll find that the engine is really only about this long, but of course it spans the width of the car because it's a flat four. You can see the heads poking through there, and then we've got the two exhaust manifolds coming down into a single outlet toward the middle of the car. Now, further behind that engine, we're going to find the transmission, the axle, and the device that engages the rear end. So it's a very unusual design here. So you can see the half shafts going to the independent front suspension. It's just a basic McPherson style front suspension, more or less, with these bars, this kind of anti-roll bar that extends the width of the vehicle. But then further back, you can actually see where the transmission linkage meets up with the shifter, and there's a lever that engages this takeoff unit that'll actually start spinning the rear differential. So a super bizarre setup. It's selectable four-wheel drive, but rather than having a transfer case with a rear bias system, it's actually a front-wheel drive car until you pull the lever, and then it starts spinning the rear axle. Now, it's a unibody construction vehicle, so we're not going to find your conventional frame members underneath the Brat. And then out back, things are also very, very weird. So you can see the drive shaft makes its way into a rear differential, open type rear differential. We've got the two half shafts coming off to both rear wheels, drum brakes on both corners, but this rear suspension is a really odd design. So we've got trailing arms on each side, and it appears to be like a torsion system, right? There's no coil spring, there's no leaf spring, but each of these torsion bars are not connected in the middle. There's actually a gap between the left and the right side here. So a very funky system. Subaru just did everything a little bit weird. They continue to do stuff a little weird, but not as bizarre as what they did on the Brat. All right, starting up the Brat, got that very 70s buzzer. Fires right up. These Subarus really last a long time. They rust out extremely quick, but the mechanicals are just dead simple. Some of my favorite cars of all time, because they are really significant as to where they lie in history. Very simple machines, but very elegant in their engineering, and I just love that about them. You gotta remember that when this car was new in 1979, the best-selling car in the US was the Oldsmobile Cutlass, which was this big, square, traditional American car with a V8 engine and rear-wheel drive. And the vast majority of cars in the late 70s were either rear-wheel drive or maybe you had some front-wheel drive offerings, but there were very few four-wheel drives. I mean, yeah, you had like the Scouts and you had the Jeep CJs. You had the AMC Eagle, which was very cool. But for the most part, if you wanted a four-wheel drive, you were driving a big, chunky SUV or truck. And then Subaru comes along with these weird little cars with frameless windows and kind of changes the game. And they were a little too weird. They only sold about 100,000 Brats by the time they went out of production in '87, compared to 518,000 Cutlasses in 1 year in '79. But they're just fantastic. Now let's talk about how this car works off-road. Surprisingly, even though it's got 13-inch wheels, 13, here, let me scoot my seat up. It's kind of squeaking at me a little bit. There we go. We have nearly 9 inches of ground clearance, which is just amazing. And when you drive this car around every single day, it's actually a front-wheel drive car. And then, when you go off-road like I am now, or maybe you hit some snow, keep in mind Subarus were one of the first vehicles that were truly exceptional in the snow from a car standpoint, not an SUV. Well, then you shift it into four-wheel drive, and now that's gonna engage that rear axle, just pull down on a lever, and now you can drive up to speeds of 50 miles an hour in four-wheel drive, and really have a lot better performance. Now it is still open diffs, which means that when two wheels lift up, you do end up kind of spinning tires all over. But the great thing is this car weighs under 2,300 pounds, and I can really start to muscle it up this hill, and it's just gonna kind of float up, and that's what I'm gonna do now. So I'm gonna have to be a little bit heavier on the throttle pedal, like that. Okay, it's actually a pretty aggressive course today. We're gonna get up here one way or another. It's just gonna take a little bit of speed, and maybe we can start to show some of the toughness of the Brat. There we go, there's the lightweight. There we go, there we go. So look, it's not elegant in its operation. It's, you know, it's by modern standards pretty poor actually, because you don't have any ability to control the spinning wheels. I was modulating the brakes a little bit, but there's just not much you can do with open diffs. But because the car is so lightweight and nimble, you can just power through things that would typically get a heavier, larger vehicle bogged down. That really is the magic of the Brat. Now we're gonna go up this logs course. We've got these steep logs planted into the earth. One other cool thing too is a second-gen Brat, which debuted in the early 80s. You could actually spec with a 2-speed transfer case. You could get a true low range, which was fantastic. But this one is just a single speed. All right, I'm gonna take it and with as much finesse as we possibly can. which is not much finesse. Whoa! And there we go, we shot up to the top. What a racket. Now let's talk about some of the other driving dynamics of this Brat. So when you're in four-wheel drive, it drives like a truck. You get crabbing when you turn because the front wheels and the rear wheels are spinning at the same speed. There's no differential that allows you to kind of make the turns with having the front and the rear spin at different speeds. So it really is a system meant for wet roads, snowy roads, dirt, obstacles, that kind of thing. But when you shift it back into front-wheel drive, the car drives fine. It drives completely normal. I really like how these little Subarus drive. 67 horsepower is not a lot, but you got this fantastic little thrum of that boxer engine as it builds through the RPM. Nice, smooth power delivery, and even though the power number is so low, you never feel like you're lacking on horsepower because the car is simply so lightweight. This car also has manual steering, which you'd expect, you know, to be fairly heavy for a truck, but it just isn't. It's really lightweight, very precise, and gives you a ton of feel as well, actually, which is a really kind of a big surprise if you're not used to these cars. You also have huge windows and great visibility. You can see out of every corner of these vehicles. Now, from a truck standpoint, I mean, look, it's not an F-350. It's got, I don't know, 4.5 feet, maybe, of bed space, 5 feet of bed space. But when you consider the footprint of the car, you're able to drive and maneuver these things into places you typically wouldn't be able to because they're just so tiny. So, yeah, sure, it doesn't have a ton of space, it doesn't have a ton of payload, but it really doesn't need it. It does a great job of working with what it has. And even though this car has been restored terribly, it drives and runs and stops and steers like a brand new car. I mean, this thing has had a tough life, clearly. At least the previous owner had done a very questionable thing with the paintwork, but it still just comes back for more. Abroad, these were called like the Subaru Grumpy, which is a funny name, but people loved them. They were so popular in New Zealand. They built them up through 1994 for the New Zealand market. And you really get a sense why. They're just the right size, they got just enough power, great maneuverability, and a lot of durability. These are tough little utes, which is really what it is. It's a car-based truck. It's awesome. I really wish Subaru would bring this formula back in a new vehicle. Small, lightweight, true four-wheel drive. That would be really cool. Guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. This has been Tommy behind the camera case. We'll see you in another episode.